Good morning, everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about some turn one, turn zero observations I've had, especially watching like a lot of LVO streams and just more streams in general, and playing games. Obviously, um, both things that I think people spend too much time thinking about, and maybe not enough time thinking about or adapting to. And it's probably the adaptation that is more significant. Uh, but some of these conversations, I think I might have talked about them a little bit in my videos, but also in the discords. I think some of the chatter has been brought up, and it's kind of sparked me to talk about it. Talking a little bit about squad building, right? And I think there's sometimes questions about learning what other people teams do, and like what are they going to take at different threat values, and then like using that to build your own squads. And I think it's useful information, but at the same time, I wouldn't get in your own head about it. You should have a decent plan at different threat levels and different setups to begin with. And I don't think you need to go deep out of your way to guess what they're going to bring and necessarily try to counter it. First off, I don't actually believe there's many counters in the game. I think there are things that are good into other things. Um, but I also don't like the idea that, or I think the idea is overblown that just because something is better into a model you have doesn't mean you shouldn't take the model, right? Like, okay, if the entire team is, I don't know, range for energy attackers, like the entire team, like every model they have, like maybe you say, all right, well, I'm not going to take Shang because he's going to get blown up from range 4, right? But if you're like, oh my god, they have Storm, and that's their only leader, I can't take Shang because of her, like that's such a minimal impact and that's a very maybe poor example, but I do think people talk like that sometimes where they're like, this model counters me. And the solution to that is, in deployment, don't line your model up like directly across from that model, right? Ultron is very good against Blade because he's immune to bleed. He has a great mystic defense. He has energy attacks from long range. Like all this good stuff versus Blade. Like Blade is horrible versus Ultron, basically. And that's fine. Like just because they might take Ultron versus you doesn't mean you can't take Blade. Just don't put him across from him, or don't directly engage him, or try not to. Right? Like there's a situation where you just got to deal with it. It's kind of like this idea that Namor counters people with DR. Like you can still take people with damage reduction, and you can still like put them up against Namor. Like you don't just auto lose because Namor gets to attack Bill. He also can't attack everybody on your team at all points of the game. Like I think that's another thing that seems kind of interesting too. Is like this character has a job and only so many attacks for the game, and if you don't like just put your model next to him so they can kill him instantly, it's still effort to go do it, just even if they're good versus it. Or you might just be able to attack other people. I don't know. The whole thing of basically like you would think that you're going to take this one model that like counters something else, and like if you only knew their roster, you would be able to somehow create a list that was so much better versus them. I don't know if I believe that to the most extent. Like maybe there's extremes and stuff, but don't overthink that. Now, what I do think is important is looking at the enemy team and having a sense of what they like to bring. Right? If you watch my videos, you'll know that like at least in my recent games of Midnight Suns, I have not really enjoyed 17 Threat because you can't fit Red Skull 2 and Eyehawk, right? And it depends on the enemy and stuff like that. So if you kind of have that gist of it, I think when it comes to it, like think of like breakpoints. Think of, I don't know. I like to do the breakpoint stuff when I look at the rosters, like especially when you're worried about them going tall and stuff like that. Is what is their 15? Do they have a good 16? Can they not run something if you go, I don't know, some other type of threat, right? Is the difference between 16 and 17, do they get something? Do they run two twos and webs? If they don't, then 16 threat can't be 6 wide. But if they run 1 2, they can go 6 wide at 17. So If you have to choose between 16 and 17, maybe you choose 16. Maybe you choose 16 because you know they have to stay on the 5 wide maximum side. Things like that, like break points. Can they fit Thanos and something else together? All this little stuff like that. I think there's one with Asgard at 20 where if they don't run, right, if they're going to go, do they need another 5? If they go like 4, if they don't have a second 5, it's hard to go like 4 wide, right? With Thor 2 and like their leader. So 5, 6, you put it in Bill or something, and then they have to take like a 2 and a 3. Whereas at 19, they can just run another 4. That's something to like be interested in. Like, maybe you have a 4 wide 20. So here's an example. Maybe you have a 4 wide 20 and a 4 wide 19, and they only have a 5 wide 20 and a 4 wide 19. You might actively choose 20, even if you feel like your 19 is slightly stronger than your 20, or not stronger, but like it's not as big of a bump to go to 20. Just because you want them to be 4 wide, 5 wide, and you want to be 4 wide. Like, there is some things to know. And obviously, understanding what the good teams do is, I think, important, but also don't overthink it. Don't think you're going to, like, somehow win turn 0 instantly. Assuming your roster, you make solid decisions, right? Like, you should have a good enough plan of your roster that you're not instantly losing turn 0 from what you pick, right? And so if you are, I would look inward and not this like, oh my god, I didn't know what the enemy was taking and they bamboozled me. I don't know. I'm sure there's more nuance to it. I'm sure there are times where like if you could guess right, like you might have an advantage or like get a little bit of advantage. Obviously, if you know they're not going to take any throws, you wouldn't have taken brace, right? I've had tons of games, not tons, a good amount of games where like their only throw was like voodoo, attack trigger, right? And I'm just like, I'd rather like, that's fine. Maybe it'll come in play and I'll prevent a couple damage and be worth it. You only need one throw canceled to make brace worth it. Whereas, shit, it sucks. Sometimes you don't have it and then you get wrecked by a bunch of throws, right? So I tend to err on the side of caution when it comes to that kind of stuff. But anyway, yeah, just don't overthink your opponents. I do take a screenshot if I'm on TTS of their team, and I have it on the side just so I can kind of think through what they might be taking. If it's like debating between 2-3 threats, I don't think you should overthink it. I think it's not like the first thing that should come to your mind. And what I really want to talk about, the bulk of this video, is turn 1 deployment. It's deployment into turn 1. There's a lot of videos, myself included, they talk about opening stuff. And, I can sit here with this screen and say, look, here's where the bump range is. You can do this and that. When you get to the board, there's terrain to think about. Are there good line of sight covering stuff? Can you pick up a midline extract totally behind something? It could change the whole game, right? Like in an open field like this, Voodoo standing behind an extract can bump to it and attack you, right? Assuming it's like a D. If there's a giant truck in his way, or you can hide behind it, like that might mess up the whole pattern. So it's a game by game basis. You have to kind of like analyze that and think about the terrain, and think about deployment. I do it when I'm deploying, like which side I safe grab, might depend on where the terrain is. If I have a safe grab and I'm going first, I think another thing to kind of consider too is like the order you put things out can matter, right? Sometimes I don't look that close to what my opponent's doing. I do normally. But I think some people willy-nilly put out things and give away too much information early on, or not, or they don't wait to see what the enemy's doing, or the enemy doesn't cover their bases because they're complacent with something. I don't know. So first off, I think about, you can't pass on deployment. So if you're 3 wide and you have priority and they're 5 models, you're gonna see 2 of their models before you put all yours down. So at some point you have to be. It's like this game of committing. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you're 4 wide and they're 5 wide. You're 4 wide and they're 5 wide and they have priority, right? And you have a safe grab and they have a safe grab. And let's say yours is Bill and there's his name or whatever, right? They can technically hold their safe grab till last activation after they see where yours goes and counter it. right? But if they put down their Namor first, and let's say it's Virus, right? If they put down their Namor over here, I'm going to touch the board once. You might be saying, I'm going to put Bill here. And say, screw it, I'm going to get the other one, right? Now you can't safe grab it. But if they were to wait, you would have had to put your Bill down before their Namor. And so, you know, you're screwed either way if they want to like counter you like that. So that's something to think about, like when you're deploying. Don't just throw your safe grab down first. Maybe make them wait for it. Maybe wait to see if they overload one side too much, and then we're safe grabbing that side kind of bones them in some way. Maybe put down things that are more ambiguous, and you don't really care where they go. Maybe something in the middle, or you want to force them away for some reason. I mean, you're going to have to commit something, and you have to pick and choose which quote unquote counters you want. Do you really want to make sure Blade is not on the side of Ultron? Can you wait long enough for it? Do you really want Voodoo to be in front of some sort of model? Do you want to wait to see where their safe grab goes so you can put yours on the other side? Like, definitely think through that. Like, it shouldn't be 100% prearranged where all your models are going. This has been like a debate on B-shaped maps like Infinity or Mad Men. Like, should you put your models in the middle or like to the side, like that you like already pre-plan where you're going to go? If you're going to grab some objective on the side and you have priority or something, put them on the side, sure. But I think in general, putting your stuff in the middle is fine because, like, okay, unless it's like Voodoo, right? Like, Sam's a bad example, but let's just say it's Blade, right? Blade here, right, can technically walk here, maybe get a shot off on somebody if they put him forward or they pick up an extract, right? But is that really worth, like, not having the option to go both ways? I don't know. Like, and some people, like, because the smart opponent is not going to give you that shot most of the time, right? And is the 4-dive shot really worth it? So there are moments where you got to decide, like, hey, I'm not going to get a shot off turn one unless my opponent's really bad. So why does it matter if he's over here? Like, for the hope that maybe it happens. Obviously, if you're trying to counter objectives, like you don't say they have safe grabs, and so you want to put Voodoo across from the other one or something, it's different. But I do think there is some sort of giving yourself space, and also giving yourself options. I see one thing I definitely mess up sometimes, especially not if I'm flustered, but if I'm kind of like, oh, this piece of terrain sucks and blah 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 blah, and is just give yourself let your opponent make a mistake. Give them the option to make a mistake. And what I mean by that is sometimes I put Blade or Voodoo in a way, not Voodoo, or Mummy in a way that I might threaten if I want to pick up a midline objective, right? Okay, I'll give you an example. Like, I don't know, it's Virus. I know this, you put somebody here to like safe grab one over here, and then you put down like Mummy here, right? And they see that you're gonna safe grab this side one. Maybe it's Demons or something. I don't know. Let's just pretend, whatever. And sometimes they either don't put anything on this side or put very little on this side. Maybe it's just like their one model that Toad is going to go get it. They're like, oh, you're going to go grab this one with Red Skull and back up, and then I'm going to go grab this one with Toad, and like Mummy's not a threat to me, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes what you do is you just go grab this one with Toad first, or with Mummy first. And you say, okay, well, now your Toad is kind of screwed because he doesn't have anything to pick up, and he's not threatening to mine. And maybe because you thought Red Skull was going to take this one, the only model you put even close enough to pick it up turn one is, I don't know, Pyro. And he's going to get blown up by Red Skull if he tries to go get it. And now you're in a shitty position. I think there's a game I played versus Nobility where I had Red Skull on one side. There's Eyehawk on one side. It was like Eyehawk, Red Skull, and Blade was in the middle. And he put, so he thought it, was Virus, Infinity. And, he put Namor right in the middle to safe grab the mid if I grab the sides. And the first thing I did was grab it with Blade. Because he didn't, my punish was getting attacked by Namor like once, right? Unless he commits a lot of things to the middle, but it's Infinity, he only 4 wide. If he wanted to pick up the one over here, he had to double walk to the middle in front of Red Skull. If he wanted to pick up this one, which I think he did, Hulk was there to kind of punish it a little bit. And what happened was Namor just like stood here, and then he picked up the one here, Hulk threw a building at the person, and then I safe grabbed this one, right? And so I ended up getting two of them because I went with Blade first, and I didn't have to do it with like Hulk, for example. Because if it went the other way, right? If I would have just safe grabbed Namor first, or safe grabbed Red Skull, he safe grabs this one, and then Hulk there was a weird build it like truck here, so it was actually kind of weird for me to get it. I would have had to go with Hulk and like back up, and so I don't know. I just didn't feel like it was as powerful position, and maybe it's just causing a ruckus, as Juggernaut would say, to do things like that. To, you know, I'll give you another example. In a tournament I played, it was a D shape with Skrulls, and like his farthest model to the side, like imagine him over here, was like that, right? It was like Hulk, and so I just like I had Mummy sitting here, and I had a safe grab over here. I was like, okay, I'm gonna safe grab here, and then Mommy's sitting here, and once he didn't take the side one, I was just like, fuck it. There's like a building to stop me from being pushed too badly. I'll take it. Because the only person here is Hulk that had to like double walk and like throw a building at me or something. And I had priority to do what I needed to do. So what I'm saying is not only should you adapt to what people are doing, but give yourself the ability to take things, because it's only unsafe if your opponent makes it unsafe. That's probably the best way to think about it. Your opponent, like, as the opponent too, you still have to say, hey, I know you might want to do this, but you better fucking do it, or I'm going to kill you, right? Something like that. Or I'm going to punish you. But if you don't set up the punish, then they might not have to do it, right? Or, like, the Red Skull's a great example because he can either safe grab or threaten it, or threaten somebody who does it. So if you set him up for a safe grab, and like I said, the only person they have is some weak-ass 3 threat to go in front of it, you can go grab somewhere else if they give you the opportunity. And so it's just really think about that when you're deploying, like making sure you give yourself options without being too restrictive. You know, like if you think about it, if you think you're only going to double walk to a side infinity turn one, right? Like you don't have a long enough range to really do, put yourself in the middle, right? If you can't threaten to somebody on an extract or something, put yourself in the middle and decide where to go afterwards. Don't commit to one side. If you can punish a side, maybe stick to one side and go where you think the enemy might go. You know, think about what your models are actually going to do and give yourself options. And there are little nuances, like when I'm playing with Wong a lot, like I'm really conscious about making sure that I'm within 3 of whoever I want to give potential power to and the ability to walk to the objective in one go. I've seen people put Wong where like he doesn't make it in one walk, and you're just like, well, why the fuck did you put him there if you're going to do, like, why didn't you move him to the right a little bit? Things like that. If you're going to, or the whole, like, you know, double walking and grabbing somebody's F. Like, there's a difference. If you put him here, you know they can't do, well, he'd be back here. You know he can't make it to here. And so the enemy knows that. And so that's something that, you know, as yourself to understand ranges, know that he can't get it with this, if this is Bill, right? So maybe that one's safer for now. But if he puts him here, if he lines it up correctly, you have to worry about it. So maybe you won't do it, right? Maybe the Bill player is not going to do it. But, like, I think threatening things and taking opportunities, I think this also kind of rolls into turn one, not just deployment, but in how you activate your models, right? What I mean is, sometimes you need to think about a couple things. One, if you're not going to get last activation, like, and you think something's going to be super spicy, like, you're probably not going to get it, right? Like, there's times where I'm holding iHawk's activation for whatever reason, and I'm like, there is a 0% chance he is going to put a model in a place that I can get him, unless it's last activation after iHawk is gone and he knows he's safe, right? So if there's, like, a side virus, right? And iHawk's sitting in front of it and he has like 2 models and shit's going down over here. And, you know, I could safe grab it, or I could, fingers crossed, hope he walks in front of it so iHawk can like get him turn 1. You have to somewhat make the assumption that he's not going to do that. He's not going, so just go grab it, right? Depending on the board state, right? Like there's always nuance to it, but like just go get it and just say, he's not going to give me the opportunity to fuck him up. Let me just go get that extract. You know, think about how the timer and how many activations you have to do stuff. Or maybe who you want to hold. Like, you can't hold everybody. And I think this happens I know Steve won with all the charges is good. I'm not here to deny that. But I think one thing people, they look at it and they go, oh my God, everybody in his roster charges turn one. It's insane. And then like you play the game and you're like, like I have to activate somebody, right? And if they don't put somebody to be charged turn one, I have to go and I have to go get extracts. I can't just sit here and do nothing. I have to go sit on a point. I have to activate somebody. Like there's just times where like in your head you're like everybody's going to charge. 100% everyone's going to charge. And then by the time they put somebody close enough to be charged effectively, it's 3 activations deep and you're like, oh, I had to walk half my team already to a point and do nothing. And that's not to again degrade the list and the thing, but I think that's where seeing how things play out on the board versus what looks and feels really cool in a list is different. Where like, and I think I personally sometimes you get scared about a list and you realize like, oh, it's okay. They have to do other things. Like that's another thing too. Like realizing that the enemy has to do scenario stuff to some capacity, right? Like you're the full force of them is most likely not going to be brought upon you turn one, and I guess back to what I was thinking before before I got distracted. The whole just do it if you realize you're not going to have the last activation and they're not going to put themselves into a bad position. The opposite is true, or somewhat of the opposite. One thing is true is like having the threat there for as long as possible can sometimes be very good, right? Because sometimes you do something early and the enemy now has the opportunity to just let it rip on their side and like not care. So I'll give you an example. This happened, if you heard me talk about like in my other videos, I was talking about like Abomination and Red Skull 2 and how much you can threaten on scrolls. Like you can threaten the enemy one you can safe grab with Red Skull, and then A-Bomb threatens 2 of theirs, including their back one, and then so whichever one they grab, you grab the other one, and then basically they have to dive yours to have parity. And it's a fine strategy. But I think the truth that I saw is, and it's still good, it's fine, is that 1, terrain can make it so grabbing yours isn't even that hard. But 2, you've already gone with 10 threat worth of models, and you have Danny, like Mummy, and Blade left. And sometimes the punish on them taking your scroll is just not that big. Like, yeah, that's it. Like, you have to think about how you can actually punish it, right? So if their first turn is to safe grab as some 6 threat, which is fine, you can do it. It might open the world where, like, hey, the only thing they can do is, I don't know, attack me with Gwen once, or like do something stupid like that. Like, if you're going to eat, like, a 4-dice attack, I'll put it, Hellfire is a great example because of the heal, but just Bill in general. Bill diving like an F is so fucking annoying because he's actually extremely hard to deal with. And a lot of the time, you still have to do scenario things to deal with him. So I think this happens on D-shapes a lot, right? You get so scared to go grab an objective on the D, right? If it's on the side. And you're like, oh my god, this model can walk and attack me. And it depends on the model, of course. Like, things can get there. Like, that's why Voodoo's so good. And think about it, Voodoo compared to Midnight Suns compared to Convo in this particular instance. If I have Voodoo on the side, and you let it rip and pick up a side hammer, well, I don't know. Let's assume it's some 3 threat, right? If that is, this is why Bump is so strong, it's, I can get on this point and attack you with the power that I have, right? And so I'm going to contest it, and I get to get a chance to maybe rip the thing off you. If it's Convocation Voodoo, I have to make a choice. I can either walk up and attack you and hope maybe I throw you towards my team, or I kill you, or I throw you off the point, or I steal it, or I can double walk and get on the point, right? And so sometimes people get so scared, like, sometimes if them doing an attack costs them potentially a point, make them do it, right? Make them make the choice, because sometimes they're just like, fuck it, I gotta walk on it. Like, I've had the same thing too, where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna threaten, all these people, they're not going to take the midline objectives. And then they take it, and I'm like, well, shit, man. I have to just walk to the point. I can't afford to walk and attack and then, like, do 2 damage, and now they basically get 2 points for what they did. This is something I've seen a lot. Where a lot of times when you just let it rip, sometimes you just, like, either survive, or they do nothing, or they really get screwed and they, like, do 1 damage and then they're like, I'm off the point. You know, this whole idea that if you think about fighting for a side D, right? Most models, without bumps and stuff, need 2 activations to get to the side D. 2 walks. So it's better most of the time to walk, attack, turn 2, than to walk, attack. Because, again, it's very high level, broad talking here. At least you're on the objective turn 1, right? And so from an objective standpoint, if you're just 2 models punching each other, it's better just to get on the damn objective and then attack turn 2, as opposed to walk, attack, not be on it, give up a point. Now walk. You have to walk again anyway to get there, unless you have other movement. So that's something I think to keep in mind. Make people waste actions. You know, the whole Bill diving in F, he's so obnoxious to deal with, and like a lot of the times they're not throwing big attacks at him. They're throwing like 5 dicers, and like you probably have at least one reduction in there. And unless he gets spiked off his ass, he's probably going to be fine. And now they're in a hole because now they have to deal with him to get their objective back. And if you ever get to go with him, maybe you were bundled up on power, or you just double walk away, and now like the make them have to get things. I think that is something I've learned, broadly speaking, is just like forcing the enemy to interact with you can really make it hard. I mean, you don't want to run away too early and be like lose the game because of it, but you know, I think forcing the action can really, you know, I think I was watching Johnny play last night, and he double walked Voodoo to grab a hammer who was in front of Claw. Just straight up in front of Claw. Had got there with like Sandman killing his grunts, whatever. And you might think, wow, that's brave. And then you like do the math on it. Like he's like 20% chance to kill Voodoo. He did it. But with bump and stuff, he wasn't in range to pick up the hammer. So then Strange picked up the hammer. And then Johnny had first turn because he was not as tall. He was taller. And he like teleported Claw away with Strange and backed up with the hammer. Like he just got the hammer advantage and then like won out. It was a close game. And you know, but like if Voodoo doesn't die, it's okay. It also, okay, I will say this. I think this is where having Prio turn 2 allows for a lot of these plays as well. So this is why I think Prio turn 2, like people talk about having last activation, blah, blah, blah. I think even in non-super attrition games, having priority turn 2 can almost be more massive because, okay, they have last activation, but depending on what your last activation is too, like your second to last activation, right? You can be like super aggressive and like not give a shit if you take damage. Like you could, if their last activation is, I don't know, some fucking 3 threat, you could shove Eyehawk right down their throat turn 1 and be like, what are you going to do? You going to attack him turn 1? What are you going to do? And I'm going to get to start turn 2, right? Again, it's totally situational, but I do think there are, I like aggressive plays where you can do it both ways. But I do like aggressive plays where, like, if you get top of 2, you can either, like, run away with the model that did the cool play or have enough power to, like, go at them or something, right? I think what I'm trying to say in general with this video is there's a lot of turn 0 and turn 1 stuff to learn and to acknowledge in this game and to think about. And it doesn't end... I think your squad should be more pre-programmed than worrying about the enemy. I think people want to do this counter shit with their squad building that really probably is not as necessary as you think. But then they go and they play turn deployment in turn 1 very robotic and to their detriment. And I've caught enough people, especially weaker gamers, where you just do some turn one and you're like, they're like down like 5-1 or something. And you're just like, I had 4 models and you had 6. I don't know how, like, what were you doing with your deployment, but like, sometimes just go, like, they just don't think you're going to go get it. And they're like, oh, I didn't plan for this. Right? So it's the idea of let their deployment and their dictate if you're going to do stuff safe or unsafe. Don't let the fear of going to the midline stop you if they don't set up something to deal with it. Also, don't be overly scared of taking one fucking attack turn one. Like, it gives you power. Like, I don't know why people are like, if you're taking a 4 dice attack and cover turn one, like, who the gives a fuck? Like, why does it matter? It usually doesn't. Like, and it can get you really far ahead. And then obviously think about the back and forth. Think about how many activations are left. Like, should you just do something because you're not going to get last activation anyway? You know, I think there's a broadly, give your opponent, you need to make options for yourself in deployment in turn one to let your opponent make mistakes. But also, don't hold on to something too long that probably isn't going to ever work out. Like that whole iHawk situation where there's you're not going to get last activation. And they're either going to pick up the mid one on their very last activation, or they're just going to or you're going to take it. Right? Then just go take it. And say, I got my extract, I'll wait for next turn. I guess my last commentary will be, I tend to get a little too antsy with feeling like I'm lacking damage if some of my stuff doesn't do things turn one. Like if iHawk doesn't get an attack turn one, or Red Skull doesn't get a shot turn one or something. And I think it's not a good way to think about the game. Because most of the time, even in attrition matches, the game doesn't end with everything dead. A lot of times, for me. And it's those games where I'm like, oh, if I don't get the first turn attack, say it differently. If no one gets a turn one attack, then the game is basically just, in a weird way, starting turn two from attrition standpoint. And just hopefully you're ahead on the score and maybe you got better positioning. Right? Like, think of it, I need to think of it like that. Like, because a lot of times if I'm diving in, I'm giving attacks as well. And so I'll lose attrition games, not because I get out attritions per se, but because I'm not doing enough scoring to make it so that you still got to keep the scoring up a lot of the time. Because if you're up by like 5, you now have the option that if you attrition enough to run away. Whereas if you're the opposite, like, you might have to be all in on the killing. I don't know. That's maybe not for this video. I'm just saying that, like, think about, I get a little too greedy with attacks sometimes where, like, you're probably not going to kill everything in a game, and it's still a race to have the most points by the end of turn 6 or to get to 16 first. And passive turn ones, assuming you can score enough and keep it even or above, aren't necessarily a bad thing. But yeah. Something to think about. Thanks, everyone.